The landscape for film has been changing for decades, but COVID put those changes into stark relief. Movie theaters have been on the decline since the 80s, but now it appears we're seeing an acceleration of these closures, with barren film-going landscapes rearing their ugly heads all over the country. As a resident of California's Bay Area, I've witnessed these changes firsthand. Where just a few years ago Berkeley had 4 theaters within a few blocks of each other, now there is one, the Pacific Film Archive. This stretches to San Francisco as well. The Castro Theater was recently purchased by a private company looking to turn it into a live music venue. The San Francisco Museum of Modern Art stupidly scrapped their excellent film program. And many other theaters closed in this same time span. These hits to my nostalgic heart were sad, but that response raised a question. Why? What was lost when these venues closed? Why are we nostalgic for these experiences? And what is it about these venues that evokes an emotional response? Mulling this question led me to think about 2 separate but similar examples. Nathaniel Dorsky's exceptional book, Devotional Cinema, and the film Goodbye Dragon Inn by Tsai Ming-Liang. This book and film both touch on the fragility of the movie-going experience, offering insight into the beauty that's held therein. By looking at Ming-Liang's Goodbye Dragon Inn through the attunement laid out in Dorsky's book, we catch a glimpse of what makes the theater-going experience so important. Nathaniel Dorsky is not just the author of Devotional Cinema. With a career spanning more than 50 years, Nathaniel Dorsky is one of America's preeminent experimental filmmakers, creating silent, 16mm films that contemplate time, light, and more broadly, the subtleties of existence. As described by Steve Polta, executive director of the San Francisco Cinematheque, the films of Nathaniel Dorsky blend a beauteous celebration of the sensual world with a deep sense of introspection and solitude. They are occasions for reflection and meditation on light, landscape, time, and the motions of consciousness. If you've been fortunate enough to see some of Dorsky's works, then you know what a transcendental experience they can be. Dorsky is very vigilant about each screening of his films. They are all completely silent and must be screened on 16mm in a theater, typically one where he is present. Dorsky's films are made specifically for the theater, and much of what makes his films so beautiful is lost in the translation to digital. Because of this, his work is not available on disc or on any streaming options. And while you can occasionally find some of his films on YouTube before they're taken down, I strongly advise against taking this route. What I would suggest is keeping your eyes peeled for one of his screenings and buying tickets as quickly as you can, because they typically sell out. As for Dorsky's book, Devotional Cinema, it was written in 2003 to understand the ways film, specifically film seen in a theater, helps us explore empathy and the depths of human experience. As Dorsky puts it, films are successful not only because of their intelligence and nobility, but because their expression comes from the material of cinema itself, the cinematic qualities that are deeply akin to our own metabolism. All is present, all is considered, all is working moment to moment. Dorsky describes the transcendental potential of film as something akin to the feeling we have in the theater when a film is over. In these moments, a film reaches within us to reveal fresh insights that render us vulnerable and humanized as we sit amongst a group of strangers. Dorsky notes that this vulnerability means there is something in cinema beyond its intellectual or narrative content. Film can affect our approach to life, opening our eyes to areas of our world we've glanced over but never recognized. This ability to open our experience to what is hidden is what Dorsky calls devotional cinema. What Dorsky wants to get at is how film goes from the straightforward nature of something like a news broadcast to the type of transformational experience cinematic theater can bring about. At their core, the newscast and film are the same medium, but the way they affect us are worlds apart. As Dorsky states it, fully manifest, a film may serve as a corrective mirror that realigns our psyches and opens us to appreciation and humility. This is the highest aim of a filmmaker, and something only a few, like Tsai Ming-Liang, achieve. So, how does devotional cinema relate to Goodbye Dragon Inn? Goodbye Dragon Inn is a film about the last night of a Taiwanese movie theater that is screening the martial arts classic Dragon Inn. While Goodbye Dragon Inn's plot is scant, the movie is about much more than that. It's about being in the environs of a film, the poetic nature of theaters, and how they inhabit a sentimental place inside us. By analyzing the space theaters hold within us, the film asks many questions, like what it means to occupy the spaces we do. What makes a theater unique? How theaters attune our senses, and why this attunement is important to us. By looking at theaters in this poetic sense, Goodbye Dragon Inn conveys these spaces to us in many different ways. We see how fellow filmgoers annoy and distract us. The monotonous pace the theater holds for its employees. The echoes in empty hallways as people make their way through the building, and so much more. It's not a mistake that these mundane details draw us into the space. Such small details highlight the shift that exists within the dark and the light, the illuminated intention of the space and the darkened happenstance. The noises, smells, and physical phenomena of the theater are all things we consider to be separate from the film, but they become just as much a part of the experience as the film itself. Tsai Ming-Liang's approach in Goodbye Dragon Inn is strikingly similar to how Dorsky describes film in devotional cinema. A cinema that is not about anything but itself, that is not about telling stories or making points, but about creating a space for contemplation and communion. So, while we may be watching the same characters and plot on the screen in these spaces, something is happening between us and our fellow filmgoers. In a unique way, we're participating in a form of community. Tsai Ming-Liang shows us this uniqueness from the outset of Goodbye Dragon Inn. Immediately, we pick up on the intentional pace of this film, how long the shots are, and how the cuts jump between both what's monotonous and unexpected. The way Ming-Liang plays with these basic elements is important, because as noted by Dorsky, shots and cuts are the lifeblood of film. Speaking of the two, Dorsky states, "The shots, as moments of luminous accommodation, ripen and expand and are popped like soap bubbles by the cut. The cuts redeclare the clarity of the shots, restating the primal clarity of the view. If a film is cut in a manner that forces the progression of the shots, not allowing the shots to come into fullness, then no connection with presence can take place. If a cut is predominantly trying to establish literal meaning, then there's a conceptual closure, there's no adventure, and the audience has no room to participate in the experience." Applied to Goodbye Dragon Inn, Dorsky's perspective on shots and cuts helps us understand why Ming-Liang is so intentional on how he uses each. Goodbye Dragon Inn uses its slow pace to attune us to this theater as Ming-Liang wants us to see it. Sometimes shots stick to a subject well after a scene's apex, leaving a void that is filled by our own thoughts about what is happening. The film's laconic pace establishes its heartbeat, attuning us to its rhythm and not telling us, but having us feel for what to expect. With cuts, however, we're given the vibrancy of epiphenomenon. Obviously, cuts sometimes jump between scenes and locations, but in Goodbye Dragon Inn, they sometimes just jump around the room, showing us different perspectives. We see this at the film's outset, with the camera peering through the curtains at the theater's screening of Dragon Inn. From here, Ming-Liang moves us through still shots from different areas of the theater. We're shown the screen from many different vantage points, laying out a multitude of experiences within what we often consider a singular space. These cuts hold an important purpose. They get us thinking of the theater as more than one thing, more than an experience based in a singular direction. This is important for the ensuing film, because it deals with the myriad ways a theater exists as a space. The idea of a theater as a space is accentuated by the female employee who wanders the theater. Through her, we see a very different experience of a film. Over the course of Goodbye Dragon Inn, we watch her move from box office, to projection room, to bathrooms, to the screen itself. Always with the film as the subtext. All of this asks, which is the true experience of this space? How wide can the experience of being at the movies be stretched? When the woman stands behind the screen, we see precisely how expansively Tsai Ming-Liang wants us to think of this space. It's only in the dark behind the screen, a space we would ordinarily consider off limits, that the film's most beautiful shot is found. The shot flicks back and forth between the theater worker and the female protagonist of Dragon Inn, showing us how the character on screen resonates with the theater employee. The two couldn't be more different, but this is how the theater creates harmony between us and the characters on the screen. Ming-Liang wants us to do exactly as Dorsky asks, to think of the theater not just as a place to sit, but as something that attunes us and connects us to its metabolism. The theater is a space of wonder and enlightenment, a temple. By portraying theaters in exactly the way we experience our own, Goodbye Dragon Inn encourages us to take a more contemplative look at theaters, viewing them in the special manner Dorsky lays out in Devotional Cinema. Events happen amidst the uneventful. Life is brimming in the darkness. Emptiness makes a sound. In our society that's so driven by stimulus, it's a strange pill to swallow. To deny our senses of certain stimuli brings them to life. They become frantic, seeking any kind of stimulation they can find. In this sense, Goodbye Dragon Inn mimics our own film-going experiences. Deprived of a vibrant world to distract us, we become more focused. This is why, like Cao Kong in the movie, we're driven nuts by the person chewing too loudly, or the rhythmic sounds that emerge from these environments. Through an interesting duality, the movie-going space attunes us in a way that both asks such distractions not to be present, and makes them a central aspect of the experience. We're shown this in how Ming-Liang balances Cao Kong's movie-going experience. While he's annoyed by the noises, smells, and other distractions present in the theater, they're related to the reason he's there. Kong has gone to the theater looking for new friends, recognizing the spirit of community that rests within the space. This scene captures the duality Ming-Liang goes for perfectly. Cao Kong is sitting in the theater, and the focus is slowly pulled to the people beside him. Through this slow, simple transition, we are shown the good and bad ways in which theaters are communal spaces. Problematic as it is, the theater remains the place that Kong feels he's most likely to meet like-minded people. Just like Cao Kong, the white noises and distractions of the theater play into our intermittent consciousness, something Dorsky discusses in Devotional Cinema. Dorsky defines intermittence as the play of events or the narrative nature of our lives. This intermittence is part of our daily experience. For example, you might be driving your car and your mind wanders off into thought. And 6 blocks, 2 red lights, and a left turn later, you return to your driving and think, who was driving? How did I do that? I stopped at red lights. Where was I? In other words, life is full of gaps. For film to be true, it has to trust this intermittence. Looking at many of Goodbye Dragon Inn's scenes, we see that Tsai Ming-Liang employs intermittence just as it's described in Devotional Cinema. By keeping the film's pace deliberately slow, the film takes on an aspect of our own lives, leaving room for us to think, daydream, or, if we're being honest, even get a little bored. Tsai Ming-Liang crafts intermittence by employing a straightforward turn of events with little that is out of the ordinary. This dives our senses deeper into the film, having us scrape for each morsel of what could be going on. But this approach differs with the language of film as we're taught it. The language of modern film is structured to be exciting, employing jump cuts, bright colors, and loud explosion, almost as though it wants to prevent our conscious selves from sneaking in. In so many of Goodbye Dragon Inn's scenes, however, we get the opposite. The film's slow pace is composed to show us how the theater is winding down. There will be no last-minute surprises. Instead, here we have intermittence used to give the film a metabolism mirroring that of our own lives. This employment of intermittence is a way that Goodbye Dragon Inn toys with the language of film. Through the unique perspective it offers of a dying movie theater, we experience the space in much the same way. The theater is losing its place in modern culture, and we are experiencing this slow decline alongside the employees and filmgoers who are there for the final screening. The role of intermittence also leads us to another of Dorsky's keys for devotional cinema: time. Dorsky gives us 2 examples of time in cinema: relative time, which is how any film progresses from the first shot to the last, and absolute time, or nowness. Nowness is always nowness. As Dorsky puts it, pure nowness transcends the passage of time. Tsai Ming-Liang uses the nowness of each scene to achieve what Dorsky says is its purpose, matching the harmony between screen and audience. Describing this harmony, Dorsky says, "When the absolute and temporal are unified, film becomes a narrative of nowness, and reveals things for what they are rather than as surrogates for some predetermined concept." This is why the pacing of Goodbye Dragon Inn is so critical to its success. It achieves the unification Dorsky speaks of, making us contemplate what a theater means to us. By doing this, Goodbye Dragon Inn shows us the ebbing vitality of this theater in a way where its dimming pulse is felt by us. We feel the empty corridors and crumbling infrastructure, but we also feel the potential this space once held. The theater is on its last legs, but this emptiness is what makes its purpose haunt us. What's interesting is that even as this theater winds down, the employees still carry out their duties as they ever have. The ticketing woman still cleans the facility, tends to the bathrooms, and cares for the projector. But while her devotion to her work has remained the same, her body has not. She limps and clearly has a harder time moving around the theater than she once did. Her conviction to continue on, to remain in this space, makes her a more compelling character to us. By focusing on small details and omitting a grand narrative, Tsai Ming-Liang endears us to these characters in unexpected ways. We know they are struggling. We aren't shown the cause of these hardships. In weaving the plot in these ways, the film helps us see what is on the screen as the culmination of a thing, making the presentation more compelling. By structuring the film in this way, Goodbye Dragon Inn shows us how theaters, the spaces themselves, seep into the cracks of our psyches, and why the quiet, intimate moments they hold can affect us as much as the grandiose spectacles on the screen. The film ends simply. The female employee watches the end credits roll and then cleans the theater. She leaves, and we're left with a static shot of the empty theater. In this moment, the space beckons us in, still attuned to its designed purpose. It remains a perfectly viable space for filmgoers, but one whose time has passed. The shuttering of this theater leaves us questioning what it means for the page to turn on theaters in general. Is this a necessary goodbye, a cultural tragedy, or both? In Devotional Cinema, Dorsky lays out why theaters are important, and why the experiences we have within them are unlike those of other spaces. Tsai Ming-Liang's Goodbye Dragon Inn takes the torch of Dorsky's work and runs with it, showing how unique and expansive our experiences in theaters can be. Through the attunement of the darkened theater, we gain a different perspective than that of laying on our couch or staring at our phones. We are immersed in the film, revering it in a way that commands respect and makes us vulnerable. Goodbye Dragon Inn shows us what a dying cinema looks like, but it also shows us what it means to share vulnerability in a space with strangers. We care about the experiences we've had in these spaces, which is a different feeling than saying goodbye to a television or a laptop. There really is something unique and emotionally connected in the cinematic experience. Spaces that alter our attunement are important. In ancient Greece, the equivalent of a museum wasn't a building with artifacts, but the seat of muses, a space that sparked philosophical curiosity and contemplation. In much the same way, Devotional Cinema lays out how the theater accomplishes the same feat. Goodbye Dragon Inn continues this conversation, embodying the contemplation and reflection that is present in the cinematic experience, serving as a somber reminder of why these spaces are so important to us.